it's time to talk stewardship again.
Now you outline a whole year-round program of stewardship. Can you kind of walk me through that? It starts at the beginning of the year?
You can't waste 3 months before you start this, so I've suggested an early meeting in the new year, as early as possible, and that would be a really concentrated invitation to every person on the parish list to say it's very important you be there. Not, we want you to come to a stewardship planning meeting because you'll die of loneliness if that's the case. And for that meeting, it would be to outline the proposal. This is what the purpose of the exercise is. This is the process that we'll follow. And then to spend some time responding to questions that the people might have. I find people have serious questions and they need to be given an opportunity to ask them without argument or even debate or criticism. Just simply say, there's a question. And I mean, the person organising that meeting better have some responses, may not be able to answer everything fully, but to say, well, at least I'll find out the answer to that. That goes probably to, late February, March, up to Easter even. Bible study programs that happen in Lent would have this undercurrent of God's purpose for us. Where are we being led? I mean, I did a thing on the Exodus, which I found very exciting, to talk about God's people being led on a journey. And the only certainty they had was that God was with them, but they didn't know where they were going to be led. Well, it's stewardship. I didn't mention the word, but it's really what it was. So then you've got to Easter. You have the team going to the sub-units or sub-communities one by one, simply asking them, what do you, as a little community within the bigger community, what do you think God wants us to do? So that by June, you've got pretty well all the groups have contributed something. And that means going not just to the organised groups, but to the little clusters of people who never go to meetings. And they will have been invited personally and individually to come to special meetings, probably in people's homes, where the same question, same process. And then you've got the hiatus of July and August when nobody wants to do very much. Well, you have to say to the team, we need 1 or 2 meetings because we're going to start thinning these out. Yeah. So that in September, when the people have come back from vacations and have come back to church, many, then you can begin to say to them, this is what you said, and this is where we've got now. Are we right? Have we missed the point? Did you say these things? And then if it's still too big a group, you go back to the same groups and say, we've got too much. So if you're only allowed to have 2 of these things, what would they be? And eventually by, I would think, certainly well into September, you've got your final list, which you must, I think, must present to the whole congregation to say, this is what you've told us. These are the 3, 4 things that you believe God is calling us to do. Okay, now we'll talk about how we do it. Then I think the next step, of course, is to go to individuals. And that's a toughie, because not many of us like to go to individuals, but I think there are times when you need to. But I think the essential question you're asking is, in the light of that you believe God is calling us to do these things, what's your part in it? What part do you intend to play?
And so this phase is really one-on-one meetings?
I would say with certain people in the congregation, it can be one-on-one. With other groups of people who seldom turn out to meetings, it probably means that you gather little groups together again to ask that kind of question. And gradually people get a sense that they can make some kind of intentional commitment to respond, and that's the point, to respond to what they believe God is calling us to do. They can't do everything. They can't say, I'll be involved in all these things and I'll give money to all of them and I'll give time and skill. No, you're not meant to.
I like the idea of kind of having the more one-on-one meetings, because I think when you have a big church meeting, and even when you present those same questions, there will be some people that just sit back and wait for others to jump in and do it. But when you're having a one-on-one conversation, it really, I mean, not to put them on the spot, but I think it does encourage them to think about the importance of their role in carrying this out.
The difficulty is not in talking to people, it's getting people ready to talk to them. I've tried this with lay folk. Most are very reluctant to go to another member of the congregation to talk on these terms. So I found the best way is for me as parish priest to go to the individuals on the team that I want to do the visiting and visit them one by one, so they have a sense of this is what it's like. It's not that difficult to learn how to do it comfortably, since you are all involved in what you want to do about what God's business is.
Now, speaking of this core group, this team that oversees it, how do you go about recruiting that team, and what kind of training do they need?
Well, the first thing is to say it can't be an invitation from the pulpit, because, I mean, a lot of good intentioned people say, oh yeah, I'll do that. But it's not just good intention.
And what kind of skill set would you be looking for in those people?
Oh, now let's see, if they've got a willingness to learn, if they've got an understanding, or readiness to understand that stewardship is not just a fundraise, the chances are they've also got to unlearn. And you may have to spend a fair amount of time helping them get rid of some of the old ideas that they've had for years to move into a new mindset. And only when you've got a group of people with a mindset that says, yeah, I can see this process could work. And the training is simply that, to start teaching them what stewardship is, taking them back to the Bible, taking them through the scriptures to say, this is what it's all about.
So you're now at the phase where you're talking one-on-one with people, or in groups, and what happens next?
Well, you're talking to the groups or one-on-one, and you have what I would refer to as not a pledge card, but an intention card or an intention statement that states at the beginning, believing this is what God is calling the parish of St. whatever it is to do over the next years. My share in this, or my commitment, or my intention is to be involved in this way.
And is there a certain time of year that would happen?
That would happen toward the end of the year. This is September time, as what I would call the real budget, which is a time budget and a skills budget and a financial budget, that's emerged. And that's when you can talk about money openly, as you talk about time openly. You help people see that we mean business, and when you're talking about commitment of money, and talk sensibly about it and talk seriously about it, but it is part of the deal to examine what you're giving in terms of your skills and in terms of your energies and time and in terms of your financial resources. That's when you go to the individuals, to the people, and say, no, that's what's emerged. We didn't force it. We didn't go to the treasurer and say, tell us what the budget is. And now it's time to look at it and say, this we believe God is calling us to do. Now, how do we respond?
Now, do you ever get, when you're dealing with congregations, any pushback to the idea that it is a year-round program? Do people say, oh, we're going to be bored talking about stewardship, or this, we won't be able to do anything else if we're doing this?
As you go along the way, you'll be pointing out that you're getting on with everything else. The team will find that it's labor intensive. They won't be doing very much else. But for most of the congregation, it carries on over a year, but it's not every week. A lot of it will be under the surface. They won't even see it, but from time to time, someone will pop up and say, this is where we've got in the process. Remember the process? This is where we are now. At no point can the people in the pews say to themselves, where did that come from? They've always got to know that they have been involved in the process.
Now, you've talked a lot about this core team of lay leaders, but what role does the clergy play in this process, and how important is it that the clergy support what's going on?
I'm glad you've asked that. If your parish priest is not wholeheartedly behind this, it won't work, so don't waste time on it. Do something else. Knowing that the priest is very much involved in the process and very much on top of things is vital. if when you have a post-service meeting in the hall of the congregation to talk about some of these questions, and the priest has gone home for lunch, the message is very clear, and that's it. You might as well all go home to lunch, because it's not going to work.
Now, what would prompt clergy not to be engaged in this process? Like, what would be the barriers to them? Because I would think that every leader of a congregation would love to have an engaged and inspired congregation.
Most of us had no preparation for in stewardship when we were in theological school. I don't know anyone that has. But when we got into a parish, immediately we discovered you've got to raise money. And the embarrassing part about it is we've been led to feel that we're raising money to support our own stipends. And that's pretty embarrassing. So clergy tend to veer away from talking about money. If in fact you ever catch on to the idea that pretty well everything you do is stewardship, and that just about every scripture you read, underlying it is relationship with God, which is stewardship, they start to get animated. And then once the clergy start to feel like that, it's not long before congregations catch on. But the reverse is true. If the priest is sort of sitting on the sidelines, then the people say, well, obviously isn't that important.
I would think this is one of those processes that the more that there's a core of people that are really inspired and enthused and engaged, that kind of enthusiasm would almost rub off on people.
They've got to come to grips with it and take time to do that. You can't just say, read a book about it and then we'll do it. It's really struggling with it and arguing and answering questions and raising all kinds of issues. I mean, a priest that gets a group of people like that animated, it stimulates all kind of ministry.
So do you have any words of wisdom or encouragement for a congregation that's thinking about doing this process, about how they would get started? Or
the first word of advice I'd say is it's not a quick fix. The discouragement is that there'll always be people who don't like it. Every congregation there'll be someone who says this is nonsense. Just tell us what we owe and we'll pay it, that kind of thing.
But just not to let that stop.
And you just have to say, okay, that's your view, and just press on. There won't be many that, with the first word of this process, say, oh, great, good, let's move into it. They've all got to start unlearning. And so it's slow getting started, and gradually they start to catch on. And if you work hard enough. The other thing about a team is they've got to be ready to work hard.
But I would imagine that the rewards of doing this process and doing it well, are just amazing for a congregation.
Well, I think the exciting thing is that people never really believed God wanted them to do anything. They knew that there were some things they liked doing, some things they felt they ought to do, but this is a perspective that says, God's involved in this. Apparently, we conclude that God wants us to do these things. Well, we better do something about it. And I've found congregations, not overnight, you understand, I'm not suggesting that suddenly a whole congregation, but here and there you'll get glimmers of light, and gradually people catch on and frankly get excited about it.
That's great.
Who in this congregation would be invited to join the working team? What preparations should we begin to make to get started?